Last time we checked, Heathcliff had really let himself go. And it's up to the others to, well, deal with it. One of the former Ring researchers told the others that they had to run, as Heathcliff, now in his distorted form, which was a giant canine, one that was full of rage and a desire to destroy, howled at his prey. Dante saw him mauling, ripping, and tearing into everything that was in his field of vision. The mournful howling had so much pain that it hurt even to listen. Ishmael saw how indiscriminate he was at killing. The researchers, who basically had it coming, along with any remaining dead rabbits, that's more questionable, considering that their leader was an identity from another world, and even the people in the glass pods. Dante understood that if they were to get in his way, and Urtis completed that sentence by saying that he'd not hesitate to attack them as well. Dante saw this as a difficult battle for everyone, as they've got to know him well enough over the past 11 months, and it would hurt them greatly on the inside, but Dante told them even so they have to bring him back, remembering that it happened to Bamboo-Hatted Kim, or rather with Bamboo-Hatted Kim, at least partially. So the clock turns, and they fought Heathcliff, the heart broken. His resistances were the same as his variant, but he was much more durable than even his most durable identities. I mean, he can make the damned dozen, the rest of them, bleed, along with reducing their defense while increasing his own. He could also increase his own ability to hit harder, while reducing his enemies' capacity for that. Yes, his capacity increased at their expense. Yet he does have a weak spot. His chain. As long as that's intact, he could hit harder, but once it's broken, he's slower and less durable. Although, when his HP is at, around 35% or lower, if the target has the most HP, he'll be able to clash with greater ferocity. And when he's at 30% HP, blunt force trauma will be more damaging, and he'll have more attack power at the cost of fragility with every turn that passed, up to a maximum of 3 times. And his ability to clash with his enemies will depend on how well he does. When he loses, he'll hit harder next time. When he wins, he'll be less effective. When Heathcliff's body was staggered for the first time, Dante saw that he was heartbroken, shaking and stumbling, unsure if it was blood or tears of sorrow coming from his mouth. Seeing this as a good chance to try and get through to him, there's a check. If it passed, they were unsure if they could get through to him, so they chose someone to forward this, who told him that they couldn't understand everything that they went through. They didn't know anything about his past before now, They knew that their actions won't lessen the pain. Yet this had an effect. It made him writhe and growl lightly. This clearly hurt. Dante was unsure if this was any help, but he got back on his feet, and this fight wasn't over. He would be more vulnerable to damage and be a little slower after that. If the check failed, the dialogue wasn't much different, except he would let out a mournful howl which was painful to everyone. And this made him attack harder next time and give him the ability to, well, let's just say he gave the one chosen to attempt to get through to him 20 SP damage. After the chain was broken and the body was staggered a second time, this made Heathcliff fall to the ground, making him hyperventilate, and his head was shaking wildly. The fluid formed a small puddle on the ground, and a check was made with one of the others. If it passed, they relayed the message telling him to not let hatred consume him, then telling him that everything's changed. Him, people around him, it's not like the past, not anymore. He can still change and has the capacity to do so. He also has help as well. Dante will turn the clock back as many times as needed until he walks the path that he's meant to walk. Dante hopes that the quiet howl that Heathcliff made was a good sign, and this healed the Chosen by 30 HP and 30 SP and made Heathcliff less durable. If the check fails, then, after telling him to not let hatred consume him, Dante was hesitant. Either that or he was threatened by the Chosen who had the weapon ready. This made Heathcliff leap and assume a tense, aggressive posture, making talking him down no longer a viable option. And this healed Heathcliff by 400 HP and gave the Chosen 20 SP damage. Then, once Heathcliff was more or less subdued, we see a vision of the past, which was at some point between Heathcliff's earlier years in Wuthering Heights and his departure. Catherine was concerned about them being caught by Nellie and receiving the super sleepy smack. There's also the fact that the front gate will be closed and locked by that point. Heathcliff was having some doubts. Catherine asked if he was ready. Heathcliff asked, ready for what? This annoyed Catherine as he wasn't paying attention to her when she was speaking. They were to race from the top of that hill to the gardens. She believed that she'd win this time. This concerned Heathcliff as, well, as she didn't have any shoes on. This didn't matter to her, even if Nellie would lecture her after that. Then she wanted to head over to a magnificent house and peek through the windows, wanting to see who lives there. Heathcliff told her that they can't. Catherine asked why not. Heathcliff replied that it was because if they go there now, they'll spot them and sick their monstrously large hounds on them. As we see him is in his adult form, briefly, as he's starting to be more like his usual self. He told her that one bite from them in the ankle won't make her scream, but she'll bleed a lot, enough to keep her wound bandaged for weeks. He regretted it day and night, that it should have been him that was mauled in her place. She asked why he said that, as if that was a major problem. He knew that the people in the house would take her inside to dress her wounds. That's where she meant Linton. Catherine asked how he felt about that. Clearly this was now present-day Catherine talking. Apparently everyone was entranced the moment she was seen. Not a huge surprise, as they saw her as the most beautiful person in the world. Then Catherine reminded him that he left her behind in that manner. He told her that his heart sank to its deepest depths, and instead of hitting rock bottom, it kept sinking. He felt wretched, miserable. He was angry when she hurt her ankles, that he wasn't a part of that posh picture with her and the others. But more than anything, he felt that they could no longer be together, ever again. Yeah, it's more evidence that Wuthering Heights was never really his home. Wuthering Heights was just there. He was just living there. According to Catherine, this drew Hindley's ire more than he already did, which was why he ordered Nellie to completely neglect his care. She stayed at that manor for 5 weeks, growing close to Linton and his little sister Isabella. It was the stay which eventually became the reason why Heathcliff denied her for the first time. Heathcliff saw that life, until that moment, was the happiest times of his life, all he ever wanted. Then she told him that she must leave now, as this was just her diary. The past can't be changed. Heathcliff still cherished that day, when he could run so freely across the gardens by her side. Catherine did as well. Then it was revealed that he was still in his distorted form, that it was his mind that was reverting. It's why she wrote that diary, so that her memories were held until the end of eternity. Then, as the outside of Wuthering Heights changed to the destroyed lab, she told them, or rather told him, that they were her most precious memories from the way that they were described. Described by both Catherine and Heathcliff, those hounds sounded like something genetically modified to be bigger and overall superior to the domestic dog, likely with some kind of control implants. And as for that bite that makes those bitten by them bleed more, they clearly have some kind of anticoagulants in the saliva. This is likely to serve as a punishment and a warning to others, that if they try to steal from them, this will happen to them. There's likely to be workshops that deal with creating genetically engineered monsters for a variety of purposes, along with control implants to prevent them from going beyond what they're supposed to do. After Heathcliff became human again, Dante asked if he was okay. Dante, clearly he was not. Ishmael asked how he was feeling, having some understanding of what he went through. Heathcliff told her that he felt like and miserable. Well, worse than usual. He asked if the bodies and their wounds were what he did, saying this as he surveyed his own handiwork. He felt that it was strange. He thought that if he went wild, smashed everything to pieces, the weight on his heart would be lifted. It didn't work that time. As this time, he felt awful, asking how he was any different from Hindley, full of blind hatred towards everything, desiring nothing but destruction. The worst part of that was, and he said this with a dark look on him, he wanted to stay like that. Because, and he had a pained look in him when he said this, he couldn't bear to simply sit there and do nothing. Dante didn't see it like that he was like Hindley, because unlike Hindley, he came back. Heathcliff told them, this time they did, but what if it happens again? What's to stop that from happening again? He believed that Hindley might be right, he's unsalvageable. He didn't believe that he did change, just deluded himself into believing that he had. Seeing himself as a dullard, seeing himself and what he does as being a destroyer, who brings ruin to everything until there's nothing left. Dante told him that, if it happens again, they can't guarantee that they'll succeed, but they'll try again. This confused Heathcliff, who told Dante that they wouldn't know this, but everyone but them would know. When he starts to lose his mind, when he's completely blinded and deafened, when he feels his sense of self, his very being slowly fading into the dark, he hears the faint noise, the noise of a clock. It drags him back into reality. Dante told him that it's because they're his manager, bringing him back to the path that he desires to go on is what he does, rather what they do. Well, it's much clearer when they saw that. The clock gets them back on track. Whatever the path is, or how it's followed, they're moving forward with them, like they're feeling around a dark maze. Well, as far as preventing distortion from happening again, I suspect that it will require Heathcliff and the others to manifest their own EGO properly, rather than via whatever method that they're using that's clearly incomplete. That's unlikely to happen anytime soon. From this point onwards, the bereavement status becomes determination, which grants him one offense level up each time he's hit next turn, up to 3 times. And if he's at 0 SP or lower, he gains 3 attack power up. So it's basically bereavement without the SP drain. After things had somewhat calmed down, Ishmael noticed something. She wanted them to see the dead rabbit's boss that wasn't Matthew, or at least what was left of them. And that person wasn't even the Heathcliff variant. Nelly recognized that person, as did Heathcliff. Nelly recognized her as Isabella, not sure how this was even possible. Dante wanted to know what was going on. Heathcliff clarified who she was. Isabella Edgar, Linton's younger sister. She came with Linton a few times to Wuthering Heights. Dante understood that they overwrote her with an identity specifically of the Heathcliff variant that they fought. It would appear that it's possible to impose an identity of someone that isn't a variant of the person that's being subjected to. For example, someone that is the opposite gender, who isn't a gender bent, where Isabella was overwritten by the Heathcliff variants. Heathcliff understood that the variant wasn't really there. They lost him. Dante saw how alike this technology was to their own, and Yi Sang silently confirmed this. even if it was painful to do so. Massault observed that there have been 4 lightning strikes so far. He sees the most logical course of action, from a company perspective, would have been to wait until the golden bar becomes available to them, as Linton suggested earlier. Heathcliff was not impressed by Massault. He didn't like the idea of hiding in the barn and waiting for the 7th strike like cowards, sarcastically saying how helpful they were, and for the words of encouragement, saying that they should have done that from the start. Then Massault said to let him finish, seeing the need to hasten his speech. He explained that the risk was growing as they moved around Wuthering Heights, where it's even growing more difficult to ensure Heathcliff's safety. He paused briefly. His conclusion was that they needed a way to stop the lightning from striking, even if it means that they fail to get the golden bar. This they didn't see coming. Not the usual decision based on cold hard facts. Otis agreed with him. The lightning strikes didn't seem to be natural. They struck at dramatic moments, always on a certain trigger, which briefly kills the power in Wuthering Heights. Gregor then was thinking about the circumstances with each strike of the lightning. Ishmael remembered that the first one was at the funeral, during the will reading. Roger reasons that it was more specific than that. It was when Heathcliff called out to Catherine. Sinclair remembered the second one. It was when Linton said all that verbal abuse to Heathcliff. Yisang remembered the third one was when Hindley drew his last breath. And the fourth was after Heathcliff's battle. Each had flashbacks relating to Heathcliff. Then Linton appeared and remarked on how it was all ruined. He was exhausted, likely using most of the energy he had to get down there. He saw the destroyed laboratory, the corpses and the husks of dead Pekatula. The look in his eyes was hollow. His face had even less colour than it usually had. Yet he still stood still. He lingered his gaze briefly on Isabella's corpse before moving towards Catherine. He referred to Isabella as his dearest sister, seeing it as a painful reunion. It felt like not long ago since she left their home without a word. Ishmael asked if they didn't even write to each other. Apparently she did write a few childish letters to Linton. Apparently she met her fated partner, that she found true love, but she didn't want to introduce this person as she was sure that he wouldn't bless this marriage. Now, considering that homosexuality in that world was more accepted than in ours, and that the fact that the fated partner was spoken of in gender-neutral terms, who knows, there might not be a bloke. Although, I suspect that Linton wouldn't bless the union for other reasons. Heathcliff then was angered by him, asking if he understood what he did. Linton simply said that he merely followed the path laid before him, notably lacking in a scornful tone and no longer being verbally abusive towards Heathcliff. He observed that the lightning struck 4 times, annoying Gregor as they know how to count. Otis brought to Dante's attention that, from the way that he was speaking, that he may know the conditions that trigger the lightning strikes, and she made no attempt to say this quietly. He apparently did. He saw each as a blessing. He saw it as a signifier that they have a place in her heart. Then he looked straight at Heathcliff, and that look had a deep, bottomless pain. But it didn't change the fact that he was being suspicious. He had many things to answer for, but he was also grieving for someone he loved. Apparently he lied to Heathcliff that their marriage, it was never happy. Despite his best efforts to earn a place in her heart, no matter how much he knocked, she didn't let him in. Even now, she remained silent to him. Then Yi Sang addressed Linton. He didn't see this as any justification for the atrocity that he committed in building this abominable laboratory. Yes, the abominable laboratory that, well, this was likely because he was witnessing his research being corrupted, which even led to his sister being killed. Linton was silent. Either he lacked the words to argue back, or he simply didn't care. Massault had given this more thought as to how many people could disappear without leaving a shred of evidence. And it wasn't due to gangs kidnapping them, as there was no signs of resistance. There have even been cases of entire families disappearing, simultaneously. Rodier was surprised that he read the entire article in that newspaper they read before arriving at Wuthering Heights. Massault ignored Rodier and finished his explanation. That they weren't taken against their will. They followed those that were seen to have kidnapped them by others that weren't better informed, willingly. Linton continued to be silent, not denying this. Ishmael saw the logic in this, as this would mean that whoever took them was someone well-known, someone with a decent reputation. Asking if he offered them a job there, promising them a nice meal. Yi Sang saw this experiment to produce a human. He couldn't imagine a single human being for whom these hideous experiments, all that sacrifice, that suffering, would have been worth it for. Yet for Asia and Linton, they clearly saw that the ends always justified the means. This was clearly too personal for Yi Sang, for reasons that are abundantly clear. Many saw this as going too far, even if Catherine wanted him to do this. And this was much to the surprise and the shock of Heathcliff, as Nellie realised what she said. Heathcliff struggled to believe that Catherine asked him to do that. Now, all these accusations were unsuccessful in stirring Linton from his current state. Linton confirmed that he was doing all that at Catherine's request, but he chose to do all of that by the letter. Well, at least he's not hiding behind the just following orders excuse. Heathcliff was unhappy about this, as he was asking him why. The why never mentioned, it would never matter to Linton, so he never asked her. All he cared about was to endlessly carry out her wishes, to do as he's told. Ishmael failed to comprehend this, as with his wealth he could have lived the rest of his life in luxury, and still had some money left over. She wanted to know why. Well, Ayn was in a similar position before the Seed of Light was constructed, and I suspect that Linton had a similar reason, albeit on a smaller scale. Yi Sang told Linton with a hint of contempt that if T-Corp found out what happened there, he'll be severely punished, and that's with the mitigating factor of his family. Linton asked, was it not obvious? It was because he loved Catherine. Ever since he first looked into her eyes, he couldn't stop thinking about her. Ishmael saw this as desperately begging for her attention. Blinded by his obsession? Someone that some might uncharacteristically, or rather uncharitably, consider to be a simp. Linton didn't give a about what they thought of him, because he treasured what little affection she sent his way. Heathcliff didn't even know how much Linton envied him. And Heathcliff was confused by this admission, as even in their youth, when he came to Wuthering Heights to see Catherine, she'd always ask, I wonder where Heathcliff has gone to. I wish he was here. He understood that he was hiding from her, as he couldn't bear to see them together. He then revealed that he wasn't the one that burned his letters. He would have delivered them to her himself if he had them with him, as Catherine was desperate to hear from him. Once he left, she shut herself off in her room, refusing to eat and was withering away. She gazed into a mirror day and night until one day she calmly emerged from her room and asked him to marry her. The mention of a mirror caught Heathcliff's attention, as she mentioned seeing herself in a mirror. Linton told him that they kept no mirrors at the manor where they lived. Apparently it was a gift, and this confused Heathcliff, asking who gave it to her. Linton clearly didn't know. He could only suggest that if he wanted to know what she saw in the mirror and what prompted her to marry him, he should ask the diary himself, the same diary that didn't respond to him. Clearly, T-Corp won't respond well to people being taken for mass experimentation for the purposes demonstrated, and since there are more than 5 in this group, unless they're registered, they're at risk from a visit from collectors, and even that might be the least of Linton's problems, as he'll likely be in trouble for other charges. It appears that the head is willing to let the wings deal with the legal matters of their own individual districts in whatever way they see fit, where as long as the arm keeps flowing and they don't violate any serious laws, such as the laws relating to the making of AI, technology that can bring back the dead in both body and mind, patent violation, or even tax evasion, they won't need to send any arbiters or claws to take care of matters. Although since the collectors haven't appeared, I doubt that's going to be an issue, as it's unlikely that they've been informed, and even if they were, the lab was trashed by Heathcliff when he distorted, so there's not much to salvage, and all those researchers were slaughtered by him. As for Linton, I'm thinking right now, his life expectancy is about as low as a red shirt in the original series of Star Trek. This is especially considering that, as Gregor would put it, he was going to fight them, even in his state. Linton, backed up by his butlers, made it clear that he'll stop them if they seek to disrupt that experiment. Heathcliff wanted to know what he sought to gain from that by going that far. It's because he loves Catherine, so he'll do as she willed him to. so that he may enter her room. Not to be the master of it, just for her to let him in. Just the sight of an open door would be enough. He saw the thunder of every lightning that struck the manor, as the sound of her breaking heart. Heathcliff looked at him as if he was a raving lunatic. That made most of what came out of Don Quixote's mouth sound rational. Linton saw that with every heartbreak, the lightning struck. The pain, the bereavement, the shock, they all manifest as lightning, then darkness, indicating importance to her. Dante then told Heathcliff that he thought Nellie was right. Catherine was still alive. Dante didn't see it as exact science, but he was, well, they were feeling a gaze from somewhere within Wuthering Heights, stubborn and lingering, but not aggressive. After fighting and killing the butlers opposed to them, all that was left was Linton. He was injured and knew that he didn't have much time left. He was apparently always like that. Yet, for some reason, he didn't look into medical treatments that could cure that, or at least help him to live normally. I mean, he could certainly afford it. Well, his family could afford it. Anyway, Gregor assumed that he understood that and would give up. Linton didn't see it as mattering as, well, it didn't matter if he admitted his sins and surrendered. He had an expression that implied that he no longer had anything left to lose. It was as far as he'd go. Then he spoke to someone. Considering the affection in his voice, it was Catherine he was talking to, telling her that he had no regrets, believing that they were walking at different paces, as she always happened to walk ahead of him, yet he felt nicely nervous at the sight of her. Massault during this noted that if he doesn't get medical attention from a professional doctor. In fact, he'll die as he's severely weakened, even by his standards. Linton didn't pay attention to this, as he wished he would. He wished his death would bring her even the smallest amount of sorrow. Then the fifth strike of lightning appeared. When Catherine said that even before she first laid eyes upon Linton when they were children, he was watching her, unable to look away, even for a moment, describing him as wealthy, along with being a prince charming from fairy tales, one that loves her so much. He had much emotion when he saw her. She loved Linton, who loved her. He had eyes for none other than her. His locks flowed for none other than her. He smiled for none other than her. He found happiness through nothing else but her. I'm guessing that after she got over that phase, she remembered who was more important to her. Anyway, after that, the lights returned to Wuthering Heights. Dante could see Linton was going to die happy, even considering the machines of the laboratory were linked to his body, asking the others if they could hear the thunder. Heathcliff was looking at him with an expression that roughly translated to, "He's finally lost it." Linton believed that she wept for him. He reached out with what little strength he had left towards the coffin. Heathcliff, confused by Linton's actions, was asking what he was. Linton said that now was the right moment. Heathcliff shouted to him to stop, but Dante saw this as pointless, as he could see Linton crying tears of joy. The machine was causing Linton's flesh to melt off his face, as if he was made of wax and subject to enough heat to melt. He saw it as all right to not be permitted into her chambers. He'd await her within its walls forevermore. Then Asia appeared again, who mentioned that to bring forth the pure form of humanity that once existed. It was quite a simple task. Yi Sang was not liking where this was going, how his research was corrupted, what was once a valued friendship destroyed, his trust violated. Asia fully understood what he was doing. He simply didn't care about the ethics, as he believed that Yi Sang wouldn't understand, as he never had any talent with the culinary arts. Apparently, any identity could safely and securely be applied to it, as long as the dough was in its purest form. Ishmael asked what happened to Linton. Asia described him as a dough, a batter, a pure being free of dregs, all to yield the finest results, regardless of what's put in it. Okay, that would only make sense to someone that came from the back streets of District 23. As the special pasta, as it's described there, is basically veins from the human circulatory system. Well, it certainly didn't make sense to Heathcliff, who asked him if he called that mass of flesh human. According to Faust, creation of a new human was just a stepping stone in that process. The ultimate goal is to go even farther beyond that dough, to seek the very origin, the primordial human. This was just part of that process, an experiment along the way. As for the dough, I'm thinking that's the raw genetic material that can be remade into anything. This surprised Asia. He saw it as fortunate that there aren't any other surviving researchers there, other than him. If any of the others, including Herman, heard this, they'd want to take her in, by any means at their disposal. Well, they'd be welcome to try, as she can't just quit. None of them can. This angered Gregor, realizing that she would be involved in this. Yi Sang understood that the dough could be used to apply any identity from any world, regardless of how distant or irrelevant that world was to that being. Asia thought that Yi Sang would be overjoyed to hear of that breakthrough, believing that this was the apex of what the mirror technology was capable of. All they need to do is to leap from that and soar beyond its limits. Faust then understood that there are 2 golden bars inside Wuthering Heights, as this experiment needed quite a bit of power to be made possible, power that more than one of those would be able to provide. One of them being located on the rooftop of that manor. Asia confirmed this. It was acting as a lightning rod, drawing on lightning and harnessing it. Her knowledge was beginning to unsettle him. After taking care of that, he decided to make his exit, likely using a corridor that N-Corp controls. Gregor then decided to try and stop him, wanting to interrogate him regarding what Herman is planning. Asia didn't have time and made a hasty exit, too hasty for Gregor to catch up. He didn't want to play a pointless game of cat and mouse with Gregor and the others. Besides, they had other problems to deal with, such as the perfected identity being applied to that dough, which caused an opaque, murky mist to appear. While they were distracted by this, he bid them farewell, reminding himself that Gregor was a Smig War veteran, seeing this as a familiar sight to him. Well, if not identical to that. He then advised Yisang to live, so that he can look forward to the time he has left, implying that he himself is on borrowed time. Perhaps Asia has an incurable condition himself that's leading him to slowly dying. He certainly seems to be a fatalistic kind of person, where he knows that what he's doing is morally questionable at best, but he does it anyway, because he believes it needs to happen. Those who have practically sold their souls in exchange for what they desired. Another that would sell those that he once called friends out in exchange for a position where he could continue with his research. But in his case, he went with Gubo, willingly, without needing a deal to sweeten things for him, or to be drugged into submission. As for the corridor, that one will likely detach from Wuthering Heights during this, so they couldn't follow him, even if they wanted to. As for the immediate future of the Damned Dozen, they're clearly in deep. Yes, whatever was being summoned is not going to be healthy for them. Until next time. Hail the rabbit!